I appreciate very much the work that Feminist Peace Collective does. And I think this webinar is also important because yet again, the South Caucasus is again a scene for geopolitical tensions among different powers, and the entire worldwide, the situation is really turbulent, and we have a lot of analysis from the realist perspective of what is going on. But it is also really, I very much look forward that we could try to also kind of unwrap what is missing, what do we miss in that analysis, what is not seen and not said in this. So to your question, a quick update on Armenia and the situation in Armenia. So on April 19, the Armenian-Azerbaijani Joint Commission announced that they already have the preliminary agreement on demarcation process based on Almaty Agreement, the Soviet administrative border, and that process have started with Tavush and Razakh, between Tavush and Razakh regions. From the state perspective, the Armenian state is committed and publicly keeps reassuring that it's committed to the process and to the peace agenda, and sees the demarcation process as a guarantee for security in terms of an acknowledgement, official recognition of each other's sovereign territories, therefore less opportunities and less chances for violence, and yet not really reassuring that that is the case. And the entire process is also, from the state perspective, is perpetuated by ultimatum that if not this process, then it's a war, and that is the main discourse, the main state discourse that is accompanying the physical demarcation of the border. And in parallel to that process, protests started. The leader of the protest is a priest from Tavush region. Now the protests reached Yerevan and mostly are happening in Yerevan. From my perspective, this is a classic right wing with right wing ideological views movement that is mostly focusing on the ethnic identity, the Armenianness, the dignified peace. That is the alternative discourse they try to bring to the peace that is Pashinyan and Pashinyan's government, Prime Minister Pashinyan's government is trying to enforce. And this is the overall setting, of course, with also the kind of this religious tone and, you know, prayings and kind of bringing also that that aspect and values and national Christian values to the protests. However, from my perspective, religion is mostly a cultural relic, a marker that just unites, but it is more of a, to my perspective, a response to the civic identity building that the government is trying to do with the emphasis on sovereign territory and Armenia as a state and state building and a lot of focus on kind of civic identity of being an Armenian as a citizen. And this is the response to that kind of forceful, abrupt, sudden process of building a new identity. And there is this kind of pushback to that. And by this, also to conclude, I think right away I would like to shift the focus and not look at this protests as a homogeneous, as I said, pretty right-wing movement. And that's also kind of the really strong criticism by civil society and many actors that are not supporting the movement and yet being, for example, not aligned with the government. But I believe it is important to look at, and here by feminist perspective, I think I need to do a disclaimer here that I use it very in my most possible broad sense of looking at power asymmetries that are created based on, or that are functioning based on different political, social, cultural identity markers, and what groups are overpowering the others, and on what identity markers they do it. And of course, the gendered aspect is always strong in that kind of power asymmetries. So bringing that lens, looking at this protest from that lens, I think it is important to see that there are many Nagorno-Karabakh Armenians joining the protest. There are many family members of families of families that lost children or fathers or family members to the war, and still carry that grievances. And my thinking about that and reflection is that although it is really important for the region to go for the stabilization of the region with the peace agreement and the demarcation process, which with all limitations, I believe could bring some certainty to the lives of people living on the border. And still, this is a violent push to move forward from the grievances and traumas that the war gave to these families and people also, and the sense of injustices that have accumulated throughout this time. And this protest, I see them as a physical kind of physical expression of that emotional traumas and grievances, because it is also very uncertain what is the agenda of the protests, because many groups, many social groups, or many ideological or political groups are joining with very, very different positions on different issues. So there is no alignment within this group, among these groups. However, another issue, and maybe during the second question, I will elaborate more on that, but really quick, I think another important aspect is the media coverage and the violent invasion of media content about the geopolitical situations, about the uncertainties, and especially from the official levels of tensions and rivalries among different officials, that is invading into people's lives through social media, very much also with emotional manipulative turn to that information, is giving this constant sense of uncertainty to people and impact their everyday life, regardless of where they live, on the border or in Yerevan city, in the center. So I think this is also something that made this accumulation of fear and hate and anger that now we see on the streets of Yerevan. I think these are a few key reflections and points about Armenia that would be important for today's discussion.
Well, thanks a lot. I think this is a very detailed capture of the situation in Armenia, and I had to say that in Azerbaijan, it's the news from Armenia and developments are followed like with a very, very much detail to it, with a careful eye. And there is a perception that these protests have a lot of support from society, which is not as I understand from what you are saying. And maybe with this, I can turn to Sevinç. And Sevinç, you can elaborate how this is perceived in Azerbaijan, and also what is going on in Azerbaijan, because it's perceived that there is some kind of stability and nothing is happening, but meanwhile, a lot of arrests and crackdown on civil society is taking place. So please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Rola. And thank you, Christina, for this really comprehensive overview of what's happening in Armenia. Well, to mirror it back to Azerbaijan, a lot of narratives in Azerbaijan and discourse is shaped by the predominant state narratives, or the perception of people about what's going on, and especially in relations with the negotiations with Armenia, or the perceived peace agreement and delimitation process, and anything else also is directly centralized and very much already in a hegemonic consent with the society. So what is in consent is not only the issues related with the conflict, but general political, economic, and social dynamics in the society. So if you ask me what's happening in Azerbaijan, I'm afraid to say that the picture is really very dramatic right now. What's going on? First of all, as you mentioned, the crackdown of civil society, which is nothing new for Azerbaijan, but it's periodic. It's happening from time to time, especially at times when the power of the system, power of the regime is decaying or is in form of fragility that needs this power grab, needs this crackdowns on civil society or any political opposition. And to picture this, it's basically a power grab that happened after this big victory in Karabakh, and suddenly got inflated ego, power, and hegemony to the system, and they are squashing basically any opposition, any voice faster than they can even say. For instance, democracy or human rights. And they don't even need to say it because it doesn't matter anymore. It doesn't matter if you're visible or invisible. You can be a target. Activists, journalists, scholars, you name it. Anyone can have this one-way ticket to the jail. And this process is very well coordinated because it's happening in a row. When it started after the when Azerbaijan took full control of Nagorno-Karabakh last year in September, this dynamics started slowly by arresting the journalists, then some scholars and activists, and then it went beyond now just basically arresting anyone, even some economists, some analysts, and so on. And within this crackdown, there is also huge instrumentalization of gender, rather as a distraction, I would say, because even when after Azerbaijan took full control of Karabakh, it started instrumentalizing gender, feminism, LGBT rights as opposing the Western power structures, and saying that they are creating a revolution in Azerbaijan through this. They were not mentioning just NGOs, they were mentioning gender and LGBT and feminist groups particularly. And as a result, now what we have is that a lot of people left the country. Something similar happened in Russia and in Belarus. And now people who have stayed have the fear of being in prison. So it's basically, as some of the activists say in Azerbaijan, it's basically a wider circle or maybe onion ring. Some of the people who were in the center, very prominent ones, they got in prison. Now the circle is getting larger. So basically anyone around the circles might be the target. Second main issue that maybe one of the big news that is coming from Azerbaijan internationally is COP29 conference. I want to mention specifically because that's where the international attention on Azerbaijan is. So COP29 is going to happen in November, and until that time, Azerbaijan is really creating its image as perfectly as possible, while on its back door, it's basically cleaning up any opposition, any human rights defender, or anyone who is basically descending the opinions of the government. And what is more hypocritical is not just the fact that this human rights violations and autocracy is increasing, but also the very fact that the whole environmental disaster in Azerbaijan is a periphery, as a periphery, shows already how the neoliberal policies are linked with a general climate disaster in the world, and how the conferences like COP29 is a perfect opportunity for these alliances to come together, just like they came together in Dubai, and they made an agreement, secret deals for their gas and oil agreements more than actual climate issues. And probably this is what is also expected in the upcoming COP. And what is also more interesting, as I'm now in Belgium, the elections in Europe is happening right now, and it's a very huge event. It's happening in Belgium. There's also discussions. What is very interesting is how Greens are basically targeted because of their policies on not only on gender issues but also on climate issues, and far-right groups are targeting them and gaining very much popularity from the people because the alternative energy is apparently degrading the economy and making agriculture weaker and so on. So the whole climate issue is so much interconnected, and countries like Azerbaijan, which has a lot of energy resources and provides energy to EU, is kind of becoming a key player. And I will talk about it later when we have a larger geopolitical discussion, but this is all very much related, and this is what basically what feminist geopolitics is about. We will again talk about it later. Finally, about Azerbaijan, also connected with what's happening in Armenia, is, of course, the rise of nationalism and general identity building, national identity building. It's, of course, quite obvious that this was expected after the victory in Karabakh, but it's going basically left and right. And what I mean by that is that Aliyev is really riding the national pride of people, this wave of national pride that came after the war, and he masterfully instrumentalizes this national pride and the pride that came with victory, and creates even larger form of national identity and national nation state construction. So, and here lies any idea, for instance, the idea of Western Azerbaijan is being predominantly circulated in the media over and over, while Azerbaijan also to the international audience talks about peace agreements. So this is very much paradoxical, also not paradoxical, as countries like Azerbaijan always have two forms of discourses, one for the internal audience and one for the international audience. And there is a huge difference between these narratives, the narrative of peace and narrative of ultranationalism. So I will stop here, and yeah, later we can discuss more details of the geopolitical shifts.
Yes, thanks a lot, Sevinch. Seems like a lot of is going on in Azerbaijan right now. And just to add to your last point, that Azerbaijan is also trying to push changes in Armenian in the constitution of Armenia, saying that it's against Azerbaijani's territorial integrity. So a lot of actions from Azerbaijan's side these days. But turning to Georgia and to Natia, I think most of the developments in our region and most of the attention right now is on Georgia, because very drastic changes are happening and very quickly happening, and requires very detailed analysis and attention. So Natia, how would you situate and describe the situation to us?
Thank you, Lala, and thank you, Christina and Sevinch, also for organizing this event and for inviting me to participate. And I'm also very grateful to this platform in general, Feminist Peace Collective. I think this is a very important space to hold. I'm happy to see some of the familiar names in the audience here. So while I should talk about the context in Georgia quite from afar, because I'm in the States, in Washington DC right now. So I would invite also some of my colleagues here I see on the screen to maybe add if there is something else that they feel like is important to mention. But listening to what Sevinch was saying, my perception is that it's like kind of like speaking from the future in terms of like what's happening right now in Georgia if the situation does not change and in recent future. And I'm talking about the elections that coming up in October, and we are all hopeful for. Right now in Georgia, like the discussion is mainly concentrated around the law on foreign agents, which is finally adopted by the parliament and signed by the chair of the parliament, and law is already effective. However, this law does not work in isolation. Actually, since 2022, President of Georgia vetoed a different laws that had very anti-democratic tendencies, and the foreign agents law is the latest that she vetoed. In April, earlier when the protest started in Tbilisi, I spoke about the law in the one of the webinars, and I said that this is the law that uses the word of transparency. Basically, the government argues that the law is for the transparency of foreign funds, but in reality, we all know that the goal of it is to weaponize the transparency and use it to control, intimidate, censor civil society organizations, media organizations, individuals, private citizens in Georgia. And this process actually started before the law was finally adopted. Many people were receiving the verbal and physical threats, and many protesters were unjustly detained and kept in the jail. So this is very the situation is very critical in Georgia around this because of the law and because of the government's attempt to basically silence the civil society organizations. Savage used this word cleaning the space, and I think that's pretty much the goal of the government of Georgia right now, to clean up the space, that there are no critical voices left to speak up. And I do believe that this is very dangerous for all the sectors in Georgia to go against the civil society organizations and media organizations. And when I was because we are talking here on behalf of with the name of Feminist Peace Collective, I was thinking to highlight how problematic this law is for gender issues and women and girls' rights in Georgia. And I myself work on issues of conflict and peace building in Georgia. And I've been part of multiple studies that studied conflict affected and internally displaced women, and I can tell that all of the studies and all of the resources and services these people receive, they come from foreign donations. The countries that are partners to the Georgian, they are implemented through the non-governmental organizations. Basically, going against the non-governmental organizations means that these people will be left without many services that they are receiving right now. Also, women, peace and security process in Georgia that is coordinated by the UN Women in Georgia, and in collaboration with other non-governmental organizations. This process is very much unclear to me how this will continue. Also, the women, like ethnic minority women who live in the villages, and not only women, actually the grassroots movements have been heavily affected in Georgia with the for example, because of the large infrastructural projects that are quite coercive to local people, and this a lot of examples of land grabbing and these extractive industries who do not care what people want then on the ground. And CSOs and especially critical independent media have been the only source for them to really voice their concerns. This law is very problematic for the women's political participation, and here I should also mention another law on abolishing the gender quotas that recently happened. And basically, we are talking about that the women's political participation will be more and more problematic, and the progress that Georgia has made until now is really endangered. And probably I should conclude with the not yet the law, but very dangerous upcoming law that the government announced, that is anti-LGBTQI law. And a few government officials visited different regions of Georgia, and I've seen online what they were saying and how discussions went there, and I read the prompt of the law that they are promising basically to adopt, which makes homophobic activity a legal activity in Georgia, and it's gonna be existential for many people, gay, lesbian, transgender people in Georgia. So I think right now, I don't know people who are in Tbilisi or in other cities of Georgia how they feel, but from afar, watching and reading and having this conversation with my friends and colleagues, I see that the situation is quite critical, and there is a very strong authoritarian tendencies outlining in Georgia. But I'm also hopeful because of the largest protests we've seen in the streets of Tbilisi, and not only in Tbilisi, in other cities of Georgia, and all of this unprecedented number of people being out and protesting and trying everything to defend the democratic, free country we all want to live in. So that's probably what I would say now, and then I would add about the geopolitical aspects for the second question.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Natia. Again, very insightful, and we all are very worried about Georgia, but as you mentioned, we are also very hopeful given all the protests, well, the resistance that is there, and there is still hope and chance that the situation will change during and after the elections. And I have a lot of questions, of course, but I don't want to, since the time is restricted, I don't want to keep us from moving. So I want to move to our second question. But before that, I just want to remind that please feel free to type your questions in the chat. And then in Q&A, you will also have a chance to, if you want to open mic and join the conversation, that will be a possibility. But otherwise, it's also possible just to type and we will read out the questions. So the second question, I'd like to start with Sevinch. So about feminist geopolitics, I think we need some kind of understanding what we mean and what we understand by feminist geopolitics. Maybe we can start elaborating more on that after understanding the context and what is specifically understood here under the word feminist. But along with this, I also want to extend this question to all our three speakers and continue with the discussion of the geopolitical moments and shifts that are happening right now in our region. There are a lot of discussions about the middle corridor, where Azerbaijan and Georgia are involved, a lot of discussions around North-South corridor, where Armenia and Azerbaijan is involved, and these different corridors involving the interests of different actors. There's also wars happening in our very near neighborhood in Ukraine, in Palestine, and how this all changes and shifts are affecting us. And of course, there is also a very huge rise of the right wing and nationalism all over the global north. So yeah, considering all of these factors, what is the feminist take on this? So please, Sevinch.
Yeah, thank you, Lola. So to be looking at the geopolitics from a feminist lens, I think we need to give it a bit of maybe definition, as you're saying, but it's really very contested, the whole definition itself, because again, the feminist scholarship is very large and it contests itself within this feminist ideologies and frameworks. But I will try to explain from my point of view and how I would contextualize and conceptualize feminist geopolitics. I think somebody already mentioned, I think Christina already mentioned about it when she said for her feminist geopolitics is about power, and I think it is the same for me. Feminist geopolitics is all about looking at how power works in our world in a very broad general sense, but it's also an approach that combines feminist and post-structuralist framework to understand how power relations, as they circulate through individuals, groups, or institutions, how these dynamics happen. And this perspective emphasizes the importance of considering how not only local issues, but also global issues are interconnected, and how all these economic, political, and sociocultural events and issues are experienced in our everyday life and in very, very much embodied ways. So when we look at, for instance, traditional geopolitics, the main area of study and main area of agency is state, or the elites that represents the state. So the rest of the population or the different groups or non-state actors are not really very much present in this geopolitical analysis. There is, of course, alternative to the first alternative to the traditional geopolitics is the critical geopolitics. And then you might ask, when we have critical geopolitics, why do we need the feminist geopolitics? What is the difference between critical geopolitics and feminist geopolitics? And I'll try to be very brief here because it's really very big topic and way much larger than what I will explain here, but I will try to give a bit of hints of why we still need feminist geopolitics when we have critical geopolitics. So first of all, critical geopolitics, again, as I mentioned, was challenging the traditional geopolitics because it was very much state-centric. And to shift away from the state-centric approach, critical geopolitics challenged the very idea of dominant and realist state view, and also it deconstructs dominant geopolitical narratives. But it doesn't necessarily exclude the state-level analysis or elite perspectives. So it includes them, but it's critical of them, and it's deconstructing those narratives that exist. Which helps a lot, because I think critical geopolitics is the one that we first, as a step, that's how we step in. But then there is a second step next to the critical geopolitics, or for some scholars, it is within the critical geopolitics, a feminist approach. And the feminist approach here comes helpful because it not only deconstructs the very idea of dominant geopolitical narratives, but also goes even beyond it. And going beyond it means that not only just in the very level of analysis to see different actors, to situate them, then to analyze them, but also to situate even the researcher itself. So who is doing this analysis and why they are doing it, from what kind of positionality they come from? Are they taking into account different kind of voices? Do we see geopolitics through the lens of, for instance, marginalized people? Or do we see this analysis as something that is not set, but as not something that is told to us or given to us, usually through media or through some form of sources, but as an information, as a data that comes from various sources, including this marginalized and oppressed peoples themselves. So this completely changed the understanding of geopolitics, even though we know that a lot of people are talking about it. Even, for instance, when you look at Azerbaijan, lots of discussions of how Russia is involved, what is EU doing, what's China doing. An ordinary Azerbaijani might have an opinion on it, but usually these opinions are being shaped through the popular narratives in geopolitics, and that's how media functions. Feminist geopolitics extends beyond, again, this deconstructive impulse by addressing the everyday impact of geopolitical power, and then it goes in depth about the political economy. And I think that's where we really, really need this in-depth analysis, because the political economy is what that is affecting people the most, and especially the most marginal people, and we cannot exclude the issues of race, issues of class, ethnicity, and so on in this framework. So it's not just about identity of some groups or some individuals, but about power, power that is given, or power that is taken, or power that is circulating. So feminist geopolitics also challenge the state-centric approach, much just like critical geopolitics, but again, it goes beyond, and it sees state as a very masculinist entity. And therefore, when we look at states from the feminist lens, we already deconstructed through these masculinist biases that is very much inherent in traditional and critical geopolitics. So that's the only way, not only just to transform the power dynamics, but also to see how we as a people, we as a women, we as a queer people, as a marginalized people, can have voice in changing this, because normally all these big events that are happening seem so distant that we as people don't feel like we have power to change any of these dynamics, because geopolitics sounds like a big big topic, and even sometimes sounds like a big boundaries, which it's not. So to go beyond this abstract, I think feminist geopolitics can be really helpful. And why it's so important for South Caucasus as well, I think there are several reasons. First of all, generally what we see now that is happening in the region really needs this like digestment through a feminist lens. And I think that's one of the most powerful ways, both scholarly, theoretically, and practically helpful, because they will not stop just through their civil society restriction laws or through their border delimitations, or even more so through their power grabs and economic extractivism and so on. But they will always find a way to use the labor of women, to use the labor of marginalized people, to use the labor of the most oppressed class, so that they can actually get these benefits and get this power. So it's all very much interconnected, and that's why for South Caucasus region, one, economically, second, politically, we really need this feminist lens. And finally, we need this feminist lens because militarization is in the air. There is, as you mentioned, Lala, lots of conflicts and wars are happening, and they definitely doesn't seem like they will stop soon. And in the midst of this constant and permanent crisis, the state response to these insecurities is extreme militarization. And the people's answer to this should be extreme demilitarization. So in order to get this sense and to get this understanding, I think the feminist lens of geopolitics might be helpful. So yeah, I will stop here.
Okay, thank you, Sevinç, for enlightening us on this, on what we understand on the feminist geopolitics. And I'd like now to turn to Natia with the same question, but more on like how she sees these changes in the region, and yeah, how it's seen from a Georgian perspective.
Thank you, Lala. Thank you, Sevinç, very much. I think you provided all the essential aspects for understanding feminist geopolitics in Georgia. But I want to go back to Lala's first question when she asked how the context relates to the geopolitics, because what's happening in Georgia internally, that's not only internal issue, but it's very much connected. How the recent activities. Government activities, it's very clear that the country is changing the foreign policy direction, because like there are two specific examples that we can speak about. One is, besides the foreign agents law, there is another law which is also very how can I say, the very bad law. This is an offshore law, which is kind of cynical, because on the one hand, foreign agent law is adopted because of transparency, while this law basically gives offshore companies possibility to get one-time exemption from the taxation and move their assets to Georgia. Multiple analysis you might read around it. Conclusion is that the law very much protects the assets of Bidzina Ivanishvili, and and might be connected to some other things. And the another one is very recent news of about the Anaklia port that will be built by the Chinese company, and Malala mentioned this middle corridor issue, and basically Georgia serves as a strategic point, and that's the way to bypass Russia when Asian market is connecting to the European market, and what we see there is coming a completely new player into the Black Sea region, and that's a Chinese consortium which was banned from the World Bank from 2011 till 2017 because of the fraud scandal to basically participate in construction projects they have had. So it's not only basically what's happening in Georgia is that it's a clear tendency towards the authoritarian style of governing internally, and also leaning towards partnerships with the authoritarian country. And very, very interesting is that how the government of Georgia explains this, like officials, politicians explain this very much resembles the language of this traditional geopolitics that Sevinch was like also talking about, because they speak about sovereignty a lot, and they speak about the peace a lot, and they speak about the family values and traditionalism and protecting these traditional values and family kind of system in Georgia. So there is a lot of manipulation into this. So because on the rhetorical level, that's the rhetorical level, this is that all of these actions is for people, while when you really dig deeper, and you don't really need that much of digging right now, it's also on the rhetorical level, it's very, very clear there that it just serves the interests of few, like a really small group of people in Georgia who are and really puts this huge number of people, entire Georgian society in danger. And I've mentioned I've spoke about the law, and I just brought this example of how it might affect and will affect actually definitely the women and girls, and there are so many other sectors that will be similarly affected. So bringing the feminist lenses and critical lenses into this conversation, it's very important, because we really need to make sure that and expose basically this propaganda and this manipulation with this traditional geopolitical decision making that serves the interests of majority, and that serves the interests of people, while in reality that excludes actually majority and excludes their interests. And one more thing that I would add, because why feminist geopolitics and these lenses is important for the South Caucasus region. Savin already mentioned two points, and I would add another point, that's any critical scholarship, and I know critical scholarship way better than feminist scholarships, because I also studied the critical theory of knowledge production, specifically in peace and conflict studies field, and how the epistemology, the entire epistemology around the knowledge production in the field. But there is one additional point there to make, is that the critical scholarship always puts attention to these collaborations and the solidarity, and I think the civil society in the South Caucasus region and the citizens, we really have this moment that the collaborations and solidarity is crucial, and I would say is a decisive now for not only one country, but for the entire region to really protect itself from long-term authoritarian life, I would say. So maybe I will stop here because of time also. And
yeah, thanks a lot, Natia. Now I'd like to turn to Christina with the final points on this question.
Sure. I will try not to repeat myself. Thank you very much, Sevinch and Natia, for your contributions. So many things. I'll just not repeat a few things I would like to add. From, I think, the South Caucasus, yet again, I think that's kind of story of our life, finds itself again in the geopolitical reconfigurations of Russia. And right now the meat term play, short-term or mid-term play for Russia is the opening, and Lala, I think you mentioned the opening of different transport routes and kind of diversifying its transport routes while being focused on its war in Ukraine. So there is a sense in Armenia that there is lesser attention to the conflict and the region from Russia. But as we see with the processes going on, it is not really the case with the processes in Georgia. And I would not directly connect the protests to Russia being orchestrated by Russia, but they're very much aligned with Russian interests. In Armenia, and in such a context, Armenia tries to shift its foreign policy and look towards the West, trying to strategize to building relations with the West. But I believe that on that kind of geopolitical level, and I think that that's also kind of the overall analysis, if you would agree, and if not, let me know. But there's also kind of a silent consensus that there is still the biggest power in the region that always can come back is Russia. So there is not much hope for Armenia to move successfully in that path. And that's also one of the main criticisms of the opponents of Pashinyan and the current government. But here, what I want to show is, so what we have is that this state strategy policy of moving towards the West, building relations with the EU, with the US, and trying to, at least rhetorically, move away from Russia. Although I think here it's also important to remember not to forget that in terms of infrastructure, energetically, even if I'm not mistaken, but the pressing majority, 80–90% of wheat is imported from Russia. So there is so much, the power plant is the railways and what else, basically everything is very much still in terms of infrastructure dependent on Russia. So all of this is not really cut, but yet there is this rhetoric shift. And so the criticism to this is articulated kind of these two poles in Armenia, and right now our Armenian society is very polarized exactly on these topics, is translated into internal identity politics. So all the geopolitical struggles and shifts that are happening on the state, power relations internally for societies are always translated into identity politics. So they are translated into blaming each other, into spying, being dependent on different actors. There is right now there is a big discourse on being Western agents, internal enemies, and there is also kind of physical insecurity that is sensed by different groups, progressive groups, and also gendered identities. Queer community is absolutely targeted. That's kind of the classic, toolkit of targeting within this discourse. And here, I know we're short in time, so I'll try to keep short, but one really key aspect for me of feminist geopolitics or feminist perspective is to I don't advocate for abolishing, realist analysis. That's what's happening. We use that lens in order to understand what's in Putin's mind, what is in Erdogan's mind, or anyone else's that is doing official politics. But yet what happens, and of course, you guys also mentioned that also because of media and how media present these processes, it becomes internalized, and different groups and individuals, people equal themselves with the state. So very often the interests of the state and these social groups are not really the same. Sometimes, very often, I would argue, are contradictory, because on practical level, the border that is delimited means very different things, and functionally will mean different things for different groups. For certain groups, specifically those living on the border, it will mean physical security, no economic opportunities, whether they can use this piece of land or that piece of land. And there are now a lot of stories coming up how these lands were privatized, although they were not officially within the territory of Armenia, and now there are so many issues about that. So these groups will have different relations with that border, and compared to those that have more symbolic, or giving more symbolic meaning, or seeing that from the geopolitical lens or regional power dynamic lens. So I think this would be the main takeaway for me, why we need to look at this through critical and feminist perspective, and deconstruct that, or take out that internalized knowledge about who we are in relation to state and the processes that are happening on the geopolitical scene. Yeah, probably this much.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you to all three of you. And yes, unfortunately, in the Caucasus, I think the attribution to the state and our own interest to the state is huge, and sometimes it seems like inevitable, impossible to overcome this very impossible task that no, our interests are not the same with the state interests. And whether any of you have the final comments on this particular question?
Lala, maybe I can add something.
Yes, maybe from perspective, I think.
Yeah, just a bit on. Actually, what Christina was just explaining is really a perfect example of how traditional geopolitics and its reinforcement is really putting us into a space where we can't really feel like we can change anything. Because if the borders are delimited and the peace agreement is being said that it's coming, what can Azerbaijanis and Armenians expect from it? And can we really expect the peace agreement to happen? If it happens, where are the details of this peace agreement and what are the contradictions? So, and from the contradictions that Azerbaijan and Armenia has right now, mostly the narratives that Azerbaijan dictates, we can see how the larger geopolitical picture is formulating. So I just want to highlight that for those of you who are familiar with the context of Azerbaijan and Armenia and following the current peace process, knows that from time to time Azerbaijan is pushing for more concessions and complaining that there are certain reasons why the peace agreement is not signed. And Lala already mentioned one of them, that Azerbaijan claims that Armenia should change its constitution, and even though Pashinyan suggested to make a constitutional change or have a new constitution, it of course received a backlash, and the whole claims or insist that comes from Azerbaijan is not just because the constitution of Armenia would hinder the further peace process or would create a territorial claim towards Azerbaijan, because technically in a peace agreement they could agree on accepting each other's territorial integrity, and that would resolve a lot of issues. But this is not the point. The point is that Azerbaijan wants to show its power, and that insists does not stop just with a constitutional change, but also goes to this transportation route that Lala also asked about. There are several corridor issues that are now being on the table, and they are getting much more popular after the Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine, because now the energy politics is shifting. And because this energy politics is shifting, the middle corridor and north-south corridor becomes very much important. And guess what? It goes through South Caucasus. And from south to north, or north to south, and from east to west, both of these corridors goes through Azerbaijan. And Georgia, in case of south-north, it goes through. It might go through Armenia as well. But here comes another issue that in the peace agreement is being talked and says that it's hindering the peace process, which is Zangezur, so-called Zangezur corridor. So Zangezur corridor issue is something that Azerbaijan is clearly pushing. It's a road that it wants to own between its mainland territory and Nakhchivan, and you can imagine how it's completely related to the larger interest, including Turkey, Russia, Iran, and many others. Except for Iran, it's more complex, and I'll come back to that. But Zangezur corridor is something that Russia wants to control. And although Russian troops left Karabakh, and which surprised a lot of people that why Russia left its peacekeepers from South Caucasus. Why is it going to give more soft power? Is it changing its politics towards South Caucasus, or is it something more hindering? Is it something more beneath that we don't see? And that's why I think Zangezur corridor issue is something that really is working for a lot of parties. They are all pushing for that, and this is where the South-North corridor also might connect. And finally, one last thing Azerbaijan is pushing when it's talking about the peace agreement is the dissolvement of OSCE Minsk group. So Azerbaijan is pushing Armenia that you also have to be on the same page with me and push for dissolvement of the OSCE Minsk group. And it's very interesting dynamics, because when you think of it, Azerbaijan is pushing for bilateral direct negotiations without the mediation from the third party, which justifies as the third party mediation being infunctional at this point. But it's also very interesting that this whole power dynamics so far has been working for Azerbaijan, as Azerbaijan has more financial resources and military power. So how is it supposed to create this sort of balanced peace agreement, if it will ever happen? And if it will ever happen, will it happen for the interest of people, or whether these political allies will come up to a certain level of consensus that will work for both of them? And Russia's role here is really, really very important, because although Russia's army peacekeepers didn't help Armenians when Azerbaijan took full control of Nagorno-Karabakh. It didn't help when Azerbaijan blockaded Lachin corridor. And I think for a lot of Armenians, that was already an indicator that Russia is not the guarantee of their security. But Russia still exists in the South Caucasus. Russia still does its own strategic interests in a very hideous way. And it's not only doing it through South Caucasus, but generally Caspian Sea region, if you look at it more broadly, and it goes through this ideological lens, and that's where again feminist geopolitics is important to understand, because the ideological lens is that we are bringing back our traditional values, as Natia already mentioned, the back of traditional values, because liberal values they failed. Liberal values they failed because liberal democracies and liberal peace failed. So under the name of failure of crisis of liberal democracy and peace, the liberal values are also being attacked, and the center of this real liberal values or so-called modernity or postmodernity is something that ideologically is crafted in Moscow by Dugin and by many other ideologues, and that's why we see the similar trend in Kyrgyzstan. We see the similar laws being passed in many other so-called post-Soviet countries, and Russia really, although the middle corridor is working for China, and Natia already mentioned about Anaklia port, middle corridor also goes through Azerbaijan, but it doesn't necessarily exclude the Russian market. So it also, to some extent, includes the Russian market, which Russia needs. And most importantly, here we see the narrative regarding EU, because all of these anti-liberal discourses are created against Europe, against the Europe that is not truly Europe, is not a traditional Europe, is a liberal Europe that is being targeted. But it's the same EU that also does all its good businesses with, for instance, countries like Azerbaijan. And that's where the whole, again, complications and hypocrisy lies, because while EU is putting a blind eye on the human rights violations and crackdown opposition in civil society in Azerbaijan, it still keeps buying its gas from Azerbaijan, increased gas purchases, because it cannot have the Russian gas anymore as much as it used to. But more hypocrisy comes because Azerbaijan increased its gas purchase from Russia. So technically, with the Russian gas might be going through Azerbaijan, as Azerbaijan doesn't necessarily have that much gas, when the EU increased its gas demands from Azerbaijan. So here we see the whole plot twist of the EU geopolitics towards Azerbaijan, and so generally towards the South Caucasus region. And China, of course, uses this momentum and increases its infrastructural projects and logistical projects, and Middle Corridor as well. But Middle Corridor also works for EU, because EU, it technically connects EU with the East, so a lot of resources goes through there. So EU doesn't mind it, but US minds it, and this is a much larger picture, that why US, the approach of the collective West is not really collective, because the interests of different actors in this so-called collective West are also very different. And finally, I just want to touch upon a little bit about the Turkey's role in this, because I think we didn't mention it. But in all of these connectivity projects, in all of these transportation routes and corridors, Turkey plays one of the main roles. And it not only plays this important role it played a huge role in the 2020 war as it supported Azerbaijan, but further, it also does its infrastructure projects in the Caucasus, now directly in Karabakh. And all of these corridors also means security, economic security for Turkey as well. And that's why this connectivity and this brotherhood of Azerbaijan and Turkey means larger connectivity with all this other traditionalist bloc, so to speak. And finally, Azerbaijan-Georgia relations. I think this is where the South Caucasus big shift is happening, because we see through how much Georgia has increased its gas purchases from Azerbaijan. It's now almost 90%. And it's not only just this gas purchases, but also increased electricity transportation, which goes from Georgia to Turkey as well. So the offshore companies, the offshore law that Natia mentioned, it not only works for the oligarchs in Georgia, Georgian oligarchs, but also would work for their allies in Azerbaijan and in Russia, who can safely save their money in these offshores and be free of the sanctions that came from the US. So there's, yeah, sanction policy, but I don't want to talk much and take much space on it, but I just want to throw out these nuances that the sanction policy and responses to these sanctions also shape this so-called shift in the geopolitical level, the sanction that Russia received, the sanction that Iran received, and now Georgia receives, which Azerbaijan tries to hide away from. So yeah, I will end here, and I just wanted to throw out all these different nuances so that we can have much larger picture and understand that the ideology, the gender ideology, so-called gender ideology that is being used is giving them enough power to maintain whatever they have right now, because otherwise it will be very much fragile to communicate all these crises with the people that are usually very much marginal and oppressed.
Well, thank you, Sevinç, for all your inputs, and thank you, Christina, Natia, for your detailed analysis. And I pretty much share everything that you have just mentioned, and I agree that gender is the basis of instrumentalization of the traditional values, discourse, and ideology. And it's very frightening and saddening to think that maybe we're moving into the direction where there wouldn't be any multipolar world, but one unipolar world with all the traditional values and this right-wing people in the power. Because again, the United States and European dynamics are also very worrying and really very much depending on the upcoming elections this year. Okay, with this, I suggest we move to questions because we have quite a few questions in the chat. And again, I'm referring to the audience. Please, if you have any questions that you didn't type, please raise your hand and we will give floor to you. But for now, I'm continuing with the questions. I'll read out, you'll probably see them. The first question is about the confidence building between Azerbaijan and Armenia. Any advice? Christina, Sevinch, who wants to pick up this question? Well, I also have my views, but
Maybe
please.
Christina first.
I'll think out loud, but I think I have more of a question to that question than an answer. In general, because the question is also about EUMA, EU mission in Armenia, I think it becomes tricky because it's not perceived well in Azerbaijan. So Armenia and Azerbaijani confidence building by EUMA might not might backlash in Azerbaijan, and I would probably also ask Sevinch to comment also on that. But I think there is in general hi but I think there is a lot to be done internally, I guess, in Armenia that maybe could the mission could focus on, that would build, especially being a monitoring mission on along the border. I think working with the communities, managing their fears and expectations about the demarcation delimitation process, and more importantly the future of living with these borders would already be step towards confidence building, would be kind of a preparatory step towards that. Yeah, I don't know if I responded to the question. Yeah.
Thank you, Chris. Sevinch, do you want to contribute on this? Or?
Yeah, well, I agree with Christina that it might create backlash, but also considering the fact that in Azerbaijan, Azerbaijan definitely wants to monopolize its own negotiations, so it doesn't even want any third party to be involved at this point. But peace building process, because there are certain organizations doing this in different levels, I think yeah, after the war and with these current negotiations, it really seems like the third party intervention into peace building really should be really careful. Yeah, it should have a clear goal, especially how and why it wants to do it, and maybe yeah, it needs to be really nuanced, also considering the civil society collapse in Azerbaijan and civil society migration to state in Armenia, because a lot of people who used to be in civil society now are after the revolution migrated and started working in the state. So that's why, yeah, it really depends how and when and why, but yeah.
Yeah, maybe I would just 2 sentences that I think what we are doing is already confidence building, that this panel is organized by Armenians, Azerbaijanis together, and we are a grassroots that are trying to build confidence between each other and try to build relations between each other. So this is something that is going on. Probably my opinion would be listen to the locals, let them do what they think is the right thing to do, and be very careful with third-party interventions. My perspective to that. And another question is coming from Georgia, but I think it's more addressed to Armenian and Azerbaijani speakers. It's about that Armenia, there is a very huge solidarity right now between social groups in the face of the repressions, and they wouldn't think that this is the case. This would be the case 5 years ago, for example. Is there any observable changes in Armenia and Azerbaijan?
In terms of social movements, you mean? That was the question?
Yeah, but in civil society in general, is there changes that it's more stronger than before? Or it's not stronger, or there are no changes?
A quick comment maybe from my side would be that I think in Armenia there is a strong conflict fatigue. There is like apathy, tiredness of the conflict. So I see that there is not really energy in activist groups to fight. Also in the face of insecurities caused by the geopolitical situation. And also that's why sometimes well, I myself, I don't identify as an activist, but sometimes I have that urge that I wish there was a protest I could join that would be for Palestine against the genocide happening there. And I'm thinking, why doesn't it happen in Armenia right now? And I realized that right now there is such a strong sense of insecurity that there's more of this really realist calculation of how these conflicts will echo in the region, how will Iran get involved or want, when will Russia turn, its attention again back to the South Caucasus from Ukraine, and all of these calculations are happening. And I think also because of that topics, there is more and more fragmentation in the community. Maybe this is not a direct answer to that question, but another thought, and I would also really want to hear what you would say about it. But it's not really about geopolitics, but it's kind of a cause of that realist thinking. One of the concepts in feminist literature is kind of this care-based gaze on issues, and I think that's something we lost for sure in Armenia. There is this polarization and fragmentation, everyone putting in different boxes as if everyone is affiliated with certain powers, whether it's kind of as Savinch mentioned, traditionalists are towards Russia, liberals, leftists, or anyone that is not traditionalist is with the West, and kind of everyone is putting in people in boxes, and there is so much avoidance of actual grievances that everyone has and traumas everyone has in the country. I'm sure, I hope we'll overcome it, but I think that's where Armenian society is right now.
Sevinch, you have any contributions?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say for Azerbaijan. One thing I can say, especially for Georgian colleagues and friends, and when we discuss it, we bring it up. So what happened in Azerbaijan when Azerbaijan adopted its own foreign agents law? That time it wasn't called foreign agents law, but yeah, technically it was same. So Azerbaijan in 2014, following up Russia, made this law that prohibited getting foreign funds or controlled foreign funds. And after that, a lot of NGOs were shut down, either because of financial reasons or because they were considered agents, so their bank accounts were blocked and so on. So what this dynamics did, so of course it's completely cracked down civil society. It stopped a lot of services. They were especially on different issues, human rights, media, gender issues, and so on. But what also happened very interestingly is that this crackdown also led to some kind of alternative voices to emerge, alternative voices that were not NGOized, alternative voices that were not part of this this traditional strong civil society. Of course, on one hand, this law completely destroyed all the small organizations, mainly small NGOs that were functioning in the regions and so on. And I think that's what might be expected in Georgia as well. Usually the first heat comes to these small groups, small NGOs. But on the other hand, it increased the gap, of course, gap of knowledge, gap of services, gap of everything between rural areas and the capital. But then again, to some extent, it also helped to switch from this very dominant civil society perspective to a bit more radical, more alternative framing of activism. I don't know if you can expect this in Georgia or not. I hope this is not going to be what we will see. I hope the resistance of Georgian people will change everything to those different direction. But yeah, this is what it is. So we have now different groups. We have some radical alternative groups, which are not NGOs or established organizations, but they have certain ideologies and certain ideas. And we have the rest of civil society, which is basically, yeah, what, as we know, most of them are targeted already.
Thank you both. I think next question is to you, Sevinç, more. It's about how the after this crackdown on civil society, what good practices Azerbaijani civil society used to bypass this law. So maybe some of these practices can be shared, some probably not. I don't know, probably not to share. But also I see Kati Sartanya's hand. Kati, I see that. I will come to you after the queue.
Yeah, very good question. Well, like I was in Tbilisi a few weeks ago when the protests were already like in its peak, and we talked about it. Yeah, just as a imaginary, as not wishful or desired imaginary, but yeah, in Azerbaijan, what happened was that people shifted from being NGOs to companies, LTDs. I think this is one of the options. This is one of the gaps in this NGO law because it targets specifically civil society organization, but kind of bypasses some companies. But the company bypassing means that they will pay more taxes, so it's in the end kind of also works for the regime to kind of get more taxation and more control as well. But what happened was that, okay, a lot of organizations, big ones, the small ones died out. The big ones, they shifted from NGO to LTDs, to companies. And what happened? They were given space. They were given certain channels to register their grants, their money, and so on, but through, again, being a company. So it was all legal, all good. But then almost over 10 years now, this year, we see that this gaps that were given so that the civil society will function, within this 10 years, they function, they find ways to work through individual contracts, service agreements, company agreements, and so on. Now, even they are being targeted, and they are targeted with the reason, and now this is the whole crackdown is all about, that they are smuggling money. So they are now targeted because they are smuggling money. They are not foreign agents or they are not grant makers, whatever, but they are smuggling money. So they have different categories now, and I think this is what the juristical pressures is doing, basically creating certain gaps, but then allowing this certain gaps, giving certain space, and then using this momentum to oppress them as well, or creating new laws or new juristical procedures that will challenge people. For instance, what Russia did after the war in Ukraine with media, how even using one word of war would be end of that media organization if they use the word war. So yeah, law is in their hands, and they use laws to shift it to which left or right direction they want.
Yes, thank you, Sevinç. Now I have a comment, I think, but I would also like to have Natia's view on this comment. I will read it out. Standing endlessly forever isn't disobedience. It's letting the government get away with everything. Georgian protest being inert is one of its issues why the situation is like this. Everyone refuses to get angry, and activist insistence of peacefulness pushed us to this dead end. While civil society activists are betting on elections, queer people are already running away from the country because the situation isn't good for us. So civil activists are also instrumentalizing our experience from their own end without engaging our physical reality. So yeah, Natia, would you like to comment on this?
My microphone refuses to collaborate. Honestly, I hear the frustration and the skepticism and share it. because although we've seen the unprecedented number of people out in the streets, civil disobedience is also another type of protest that is more disruptive, and that has a disruption to the day-to-day activities more consistently. So at some point, I've had moments. Again, I'm not in Tbilisi, so I cannot speak from the ground. But I've had moments when I was also thinking that there has to be more civil disobedience. But then again, when you try to see this in practice, that might be you probably see problems and explanations why that did not happen. Like, for example, the university students started strike and not going into the auditoriums, and there were several calls, for example, for different trade unions to join the for trade unions to join the strike. But I would share the frustration that in the large scale civic disobedience did not happen. However, I will not be hopeless with regard to elections, because I do understand about the physical threats for queer people and why they might be leaving, but the physical threats are also happening for the civic activists. So if really the elections will be decisive for Georgian critically minded every citizen, no matter you are a civil society activist, you are a queer activist, you are a just private citizen who has a critical point of view. Savinj mentioned this use of the word war. For us, it might be use of the word agent. That's something that they can silence you. But I'm still hopeful for the elections, because we have a 2012 experience. Back then, I was a university student. I voted. I was also election observer in one of the villages in Georgia, and I really remember how tense the situation was, but still it happened. And I remember 2020 elections in Moldova. Actually, pre-election periods, it happened that I was in Chisinau because I have very close Moldovan friends, and I could see how the society was mobilized there, and they felt really hopeless, because in Moldovan society, it also was very like a pro-Russian on an average, and they did not really feel like winning the election, but they won. And to be honest, I'm part of diaspora here, and I see how Georgian diaspora is mobilized. And this is really, even diaspora, I'm probably the youngest member of the diaspora, but I see people here say that this is the most Georgian diaspora have been mobilized and really alarmed and really exploring the opportunities to not only vote but also to protect the votes. So I do hear and share frustration what was voiced, but I also I want to remain the optimist, but not just passive optimist, doing something optimist, which I do see internally is happening, and in diaspora is happening. So that would be my comment. I don't know how satisfactory these reflections are, but that's what my reflections to the comment.
No, thank you, Natia. I think the next question is also addressed mostly to you. It's about the analysis, or it's about the increasing economic and political influence of China in the region, specifically in Georgia, and how would you analyze and comment on it from feminist perspective, and what are the specific threats against feminist agenda?
Yeah, I see the comment. The question is posted from my very good friend Nino. So I bet she also has many critical, the clear response to this. My reflection to that would be the China is not the only actor basically coming into Georgia's reality. We've seen Georgian Prime Minister going to the funeral of Iranian president, and we've seen the so many Russian politicians and the members of the parliament commenting what's happening in Georgia. So for Georgia, and this is what I've tried to explain here to these, for people who are not necessarily, in the United States, for people who are not necessarily involved in the politics very much, how Georgia cannot be stuck in the neutrality and cannot be I mean, cannot be part of this, like the European Union, and also having that strong connections and ties with the authoritarian regimes. So if you make that choice to go and lean towards the authoritarian regimes, there are consequences for the people. And I do believe that the women will be one of the first ones who bear the consequences, starting with the political participation and like many other points that really last few years became how difficult it was. I've seen for women's movements in Georgia to get where they have been. We all have been 2 months before. I'm trying to not like even we exclude last 2 months, but any kind of perks in quotations that the authoritarian regimes can bring, and that we will see in Georgia. That so unfortunately I don't know what else specifically I could tell, but it will be oppressive for many people, especially for women and girls and other groups who are also in minorities.
Thank you again. Maybe we can take Kati's question now. Kati, can you open your microphone, please?
Yes, thank you very much for your presentations. I just want to make 2 brief comments. I was on the road and I was interrupted for 15 minutes, but although I listened in both two sections of the participants, and if you already mentioned Abkhazia, I can directly go to the second comment, which is related to economics. So if not, then like Abkhazia is also part of the region, and there is also the similar situation right now. They are also going to adopt this law, but the adoption of the law in Georgia, I think, and I know the comments that they are making on online in social media, affect also the situation in Abkhazia, because some of the fundings are going there through Georgia, through Tbilisi. So it's not something that we're talking about, like it's very regional, I can say, geopolitics, but also the with regional roots. And I cannot predict what will happen in Abkhazia, because they also have several laws to discuss in the parliament, I think, in the next hearings. But another aspect that I wanted to add about economics, Natia already mentioned some of the very important issues, but in terms of economy, Georgia is very different from Azerbaijan, from Belarus, from Armenia and Russia, because the economy is dependent so much on this foreign aid. We don't have any resources, we don't have any large diaspora or agriculture that can feed local economy. So it means that if this law will get into force and civil society organizations need to be closed down, then it means that many people will lose their jobs. We're talking about thousands and thousands. It's large unemployment, and probably the very sad solution to this will be that people will migrate. And as you know, Georgia is 3.7 million people, which will change entire demography, I think, in Georgia, but also probably in the region. Thank you. This is what I wanted to add, because in larger picture, I miss always these points about Abkhazia while discussing the laws in Georgia and the current situation in the South Caucasus region.
Thank you, Kati. Very much appreciated. And again, rightly mentioned, it's really hard with this. Unfortunately, a lot of oppressions, closed borders and everything to connect with the people and activists from different parts of the Caucasus. And we don't want to get into the discussions that we probably won't be able to get insight, because we don't have that connections there. So very much appreciated what you just mentioned and covered this perspective as well. Thank you. Thank you for this. Then I'm moving to the next question. which is about the how can feminists from South Caucasus, broader EACA, and in general broader region can jointly join the forces and build solidarity against the Russia and any other big geopolitical actors. It's, I think, addressed to all speakers, so whoever wants to start. But also I would like to ask you to keep the time in mind, so maybe one of you can address this question. So
I can comment. I don't know, just briefly. I don't want to take much space, but it's a very important question because yes, we need transnational solidarity. We need international solidarity, and I think feminism and feminist activism is really a lens that can connect us, and it has so much intersections. But not just any feminism. I think we really have to be clear on our vision and our views on what kind of feminism we're talking about, because yes, we are dealing with an evil, we are dealing with an imperial power, but we are also dealing with the global capitalist powers. We are also dealing with the neoliberal extractivists who come and grab our lands. So it's not just one empire. We are also dealing with several empires. But one of these empires is also the colonizer who has colonized us for so long. So it has many layers. And that's why in the midst of all this, I think we really have to be very strategic in our organizing of ourselves. And I see it through the intersection of class, through the intersection of different radical imaginations of our region, and that goes beyond, of course, nationalist or goes beyond any form of militarist imagination. But it's very hard. It's very hard because we have very little communication. I think that's what we are trying to address as a Feminist Peace Collective, at least for the South Caucasus. We are trying on an individual level or a very tiny group level to connect, because the issues, we have different contexts, we have different political realities, but we have a lot of similarities as well, and therefore we can find a lot of these intersecting moments to struggle together. And also patriarchy, generally patriarchy and capitalism, the combination of this duo works very similarly. So as Kathy already mentioned, for instance, from migration to any other issue that is going to face us even further, we really have to be ready and prepare ourselves to fight with these different levels of oppression. And I agree that we should have this communication, but how? That is another question that needs another time to discuss.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And I think next question is very much connected to this. Maybe if you have any brief comments to that, but I would think that you already covered this question, which is about the ongoing genocide in Palestine and how within this imperial different interests we can navigate. I think you pretty much covered that too. But if any of you feel that you have some comments, please go ahead now. Otherwise, I will move to the next question.
Just a bit of comment. I'm so sorry. I have to really say it out loud. And I thank the person who raised this question. I think the genocide that is happening in Gaza and whatever happening with Palestinian people globally is really a rise up, because yes, the invasion of Ukraine was something that also touched all of us and made us like question a lot of things. But whatever is happening in Palestine is through the lens of basically every level of oppression we can imagine. And that's why it's through this every level of oppression that one society, one group of people faces, I think we have this now a momentum actually to unite. And that's why, unfortunately, in the South Caucasus, things are so complicated and we are so much busy with our own stuffs. We really put a blind eye to certain regions because we again have our own conflicts and our own struggles. But I think this is also momentum for us to connect, like our comrades in Turkey, what they did with SOCAR, the Azerbaijani oil company that provides most of the oil of Israel, and they were protesting that. So yeah, we need that struggles, and we need to connect, because when we will connect, we will not be minority and not not be in this like small group of marginalized bubbles, I think.
Very, very important. I think when, yes, in Ukraine, a lot of feminists and question the stance to militarization, to colonialism. Now with Palestine, we have, I think, globally questioning the stance on everything, basically, and how these liberal values basically crashing in front of our eyes because of the very differentiated approach to Ukraine and Palestine. Despite being in a very similar situation, right? Okay, thanks a lot. And I think I'm moving to the last question, which is about the support provided by Asian countries to South Caucasus, whether we have any information about this. And again, I think this is to everyone. Well, my particular knowledge about this is that when Azerbaijan specifically wouldn't, not only Azerbaijan, I think the one of the supports was that Central Asian feminist.
Nala, we can't hear you.
You can't hear me?
Now we can hear you.
Sorry, I think this was something with my connection. I was saying that, to my knowledge, one of the good examples is that feminists and queer activists from Central Asia, they organize very well to find the alternative resources for funding and bringing the resources to our region. And this is how I think the grassroots activists from South Caucasus benefited from this kind of support. But this is to my knowledge. If you have any other information about the support to activists, please go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to comment that like the Asian countries, the Central Asian countries, of course, because of our common past of being part of Soviet Union, has a lot of has inherited of us a lot of similarities. So we have certain connection. Also, language-wise, there is some colonial language connection there. But generally, Asian countries, I think we don't have that much of connection because so much so that this region has thrived to be part of Europe. Most of the struggles have been towards in coordination with at least Eastern Europe, Turkey, more than Asia. But situation in Asia is so much similar. We have so many similarities. Even, for instance, feminists in China. I always compare it with the feminist movement in Azerbaijan. There are so many similarities, but there is no alliance or coordination, as far as I know. But maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, there is always Western gaze, even from activists. Chris, you want to jump?
Yeah, just a thought that popped up to my mind right now listening to you, that actually there is a lack of that connections. I think they would be relevant considering especially the Central Asian countries with post-Soviet experience and heritage. I think we do share certain similar trajectories in state building and the effect of state building, and also the authoritarian fluctuations with Russia's influence. I think maybe there is a space, there is a need to create that space for connections and exchange of knowledge that we could maybe consider.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And I think Asia is big. It's not only now thinking about Central Asia, but it's also probably Middle East, which we are mentally, I think, very close, culturally very close, but politically pretty much distant, but having similar problems. I saw a comment from Ekaterina, but I also saw her hand. I don't know whether she wants to join the conversation or
hello. I'm sorry, just I had like one quick comment about the support, and hello everyone, and thank you so much. This is very much thoughtful discussion I've ever participated in. This is really great that I'm listening to you. And I fully agree with everything what you already discussed. And I know Savinj, and I'm happy that we know each other. So I wanted to comment like quickly that I'm also like, especially regarding the support that I'm part of the fund, which is really trying to build the movement-led agendas for the philanthropy. And this is, listening to you, this is like a brilliant work what you are doing. So, and we really try to build the Feminist Intersection Fund, and especially for these regions, and especially for the South Caucasus, Caucasus in general, and Central Asia and North Asia. So, and these are the cross regional and cross solidarity that we are really seeking and looking for in general. So I'm representing the Dallin Fund, and I would be happy that like to be supportive for your work, and looking forward to hear more about this as well. Just quick comment, and this is like in regard to the support, like from maybe from funders as well. So the funders should listen more to the grassroots, and to really like build a collective power together somehow to like what you already mentioned, to overcome all the challenges, especially what we see around this region now. Thank you so much for this discussion. It was very, very much useful and fruitful for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Katerina, for comments, and thank you for joining. And I think we are coming to the end of the webinar. If you have any final remarks, it's the right time to do them. Otherwise, I will slowly wrap up.
I just want to thank you really for this webinar. I learned a lot myself during this discussion, and I absolutely value these spaces. And sometimes I think it seems like we are marginal minority in views we have, in criticisms we have. Probably it is true, but I see very much value in continuing these conversations, because there are certain structures, they're functioning very well, they have their own systems in place, and we try to for now we are trying to deconstruct and criticize it, and only through constant process of doing that, I think we will be able to come up with the alternative, with a meaningful alternative to that. So yeah, and I see all of you contributing to it, and really appreciate the spaces.
I will also say really sincere thanks. I'm really grateful that I'm part of this collective, and this collective exists, because this is a very decentralized, very critical, and very much needed space. And what Savinj said, this communication, finding each other, connecting with each other, and sharing, like sort of countering these real politics, hard power, militarism, everything that seems very much the reality that cannot be altered. And these conversations, and also knowing that the work that individuals here I know do goes against it, it's very, very important. And I wanted earlier to reflect, but did not say how about these partnerships and collaborations, and what can be done. There is a short-term things that we are all thinking, but there is a longer term thing that I'm really thinking, the academia, and rethinking the knowledge production, and the academic debates, how it happens. This is very important, and how policy making is happening in the big cities. That's also very important, and having women and feminist perspectives there, it's crucial. So for the as much as important this is to happen in a short-term perspective, I also see this as a long-term struggle for all of these people. And I'm grateful again for everybody who joined and who stayed until now. I know it's quite late for the Caucasus time, at least. And as we say, in solidarity, in peace. That's all from me.
Savinj, any final thoughts from you?
I just appreciate it. I'm really very much full of emotions now. I think it was, yeah, I wish we have more spaces like this. I wish we have more conversations like this, and I hope we will. I hope we will have constant communication and strategizing so that we will not just react, because that's what academia is doing usually once the things happen, only after that reacting. But I hope we will also do our activism, constant activism, and be connected. So thank you so much, Christina, Natia, and thank you so much, Lava, and everyone for this great discussion.
Yes, I thank you all for coming and participating, and thanking all the participants who stayed until the end. I join all your words, I join all your wishes. I wish we have more spaces like this, but I'm also very happy to be part of this conversation and being part of this space. So thank you again. This is the end. We will upload the webinar to the website in case you would like to share or watch later. So with solidarity, and take care.